The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Jesus said to the chief priests and the elders of the people, "Hear another parable. There was a landowner who planted a vineyard, put a hedge around it, dug a wine press in it, and built a tower. Then he leased it to tenants and went on a journey. When vintage time drew near, he sent his servants to the tenants to obtain his produce. But the tenants seized the servants, and one they beat, another they killed, and a third they stoned. Again, he sent other servants, more numerous than the first ones, but they treated them in the same way. Finally, he sent his son to them, thinking, 'They will respect my son.' But when the tenants saw the son, they said to one another, 'This is the heir. Come, let us kill him and acquire his inheritance.' They seized him, threw him out of the vineyard, and killed him. What will the owner of the vineyard do to those tenants when he comes?" They answered him, "He will put those wretched men to a wretched death and lease his vineyard to other tenants, who will give him the produce at the proper times." And Jesus said to them, "Did you never read in the scriptures, 'The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. By the Lord has this been done, and it is wonderful in our eyes. Therefore I say to you, the kingdom of God will be taken away from you and given to a people that will produce its fruit." When the chief priests and the Pharisees heard his parable, they knew that he was speaking about them. And although they were attempting to arrest him, they feared the crowds, for they regarded him as a prophet. My sisters and brothers, the gospel of the Lord.
Praise you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Certainly in our time, we abhor, headlines in newspapers that are about violence somewhere, sometime, and how awful it is. And unfortunately, we see it goes back to the very beginning, even before Joseph. Cain kills Abel. Something within human beings that, unless we're centered in God and centered in grace, it can be so easy to become jealous and vile and resentful. Only in recent years did I hear the expression dysfunctional families. That probably was a psychological term that came out 20 or 30 years ago, but dysfunctional families have been around from the beginning. Again, you go back to Cain and Abel, they were brothers. And you go to the horror of the reading today of Joseph, who was the youngest and beloved of his father. He loved all his kids, but right away, his brothers, are jealous of him. And how insidious it is, what they can even do, plotting against him, going to murder him, throw him in the cistern. Then eventually, we won't kill him, but we'll sell him into slavery and tell our father some lie. The fact is, we know, and probably can all look at our own families, maybe in our own generation, but probably if all of us could go back 3 or 4 generations, maybe even the present one, we can find dysfunction. We can find hurt and resentment and jealousy in family life. And how sad. We can find that in the Christian family life. We find it in the human family. So we certainly acknowledge on this day especially the reality of what violence can do, what people can do. In that gospel, just think about it. Jesus is telling this parable. Remember, he weaves a story. It's not a true story. He's telling a story to make a point to the chief priests, to the so-called religious ones, and talking about how the landowner kept sending people there, and then eventually sent his own son. Jesus knew this is not long before Jesus is betrayed and crucified. So he knows what's happening in his own life, and he tells this kind of story. And the chief priests hear it, and rather than hearing it and saying, "Wow, boy, we're going down the wrong path. We got to convert. This is a good man. This is of God. We got to do the right thing." No. It simply says, when they heard his parables, they knew he was speaking about them. And although they were attempting to arrest him, they feared the crowds, for the crowds regarded him as a prophet. And so that's the only reason. It wasn't because there was less hatred. It wasn't because they had a conversion of heart. It wasn't because this parable spoke to them. Again, The reality is, that still goes on in our world today. We need to pray for conversion of heart in nations and families and individuals all over. And we also need to be careful and look at ourselves. In each one of us, is there even some small amount of jealousy or resentment or negative thoughts about somebody or wishing somebody weren't around? You know, we all probably have people we don't like. Do we get negative thinking, or do we say, Lord, I want to pray for that person, because that person needs conversion of heart? Because if there's hate in their heart, that's no reason for us to hate back. That's all the more reason to pray. And remember the powerful example of Jesus, who even on the cross said to those who hate him, Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. Kind of an interesting word. They know not what they do. That doesn't get them off the hook. But somehow people not realizing how dehumanized they can become in who they are and how they treat others. Let's take that moment and pray that anybody that has violent attitudes or heart will be converted by the Jesus Christ who showed on the cross that violence begets violence, but violence responded to with mercy and love can, maybe unfortunately not with everybody, but convert hearts. God bless you.